Did you ask me about marijuana last time? Yeah. You don't need to worry about anything. You can hit me as hard as you want.
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. In our final conversation with Kurt Francom, he's a podcaster and author of Is God Disappointed in Me? We're going to jump away from his book a little bit. I'm going to hit him with a few other questions. So we'll talk a little bit about whether he thinks girls should be able to pass the sacrament. He's got some really interesting things to say there. We'll also talk about Christian nationalism. Is that a problem in the LDS Church? You won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. All right. I'm trying to remember, is there anything else in your book you want to cover before I start hitting you with other questions that are completely unrelated?
I mean, that's the gist of it, I think. The main points. I don't know if there's another direction in the book. I mean, I talk about wounding we experience in mortality and, unconditional love, which is sometimes a buzzword in faith discussions that is often dismissed. And then just giving grace for grace and those things. So I don't know where people should check out the book if they want the whole thing. But
we'll give it to them again. Let them see it. You can get it on Amazon.
Yeah. Amazon Is God Disappointed in Me? Removing Shame from a Gospel of Grace. And try it out. It's on Kindle, Audible. I read every word. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I need to get into the audiobooks. In fact, somebody told me I should do that with my podcast, but it's extra work, so I haven't done it.
That's why it needs more patrons, folks.
Yes, it needs more patrons for sure.
No, so any question you want to throw at me, I'm happy to entertain.
Right, so I know the last time you and I talked, I wanted to hit Bishop Francom with all
the you hit me hard, and we're still
unorthodox questions. I even told you I wasn't going to ask you about marijuana this time like I did last time.
Because that's not a deep well in my mind. So,
so anyway, lately I've been noticing in the news, we'll get into current events a little bit, even though we're a history podcast. There are a lot of people that are saying, why can't girls pass the sacrament? I talked to Greg Prince, it's been several years. And one of the things that he said, back in the 19th century, priests, deacons, and teachers were adults. And so it was around the turn of the century, the church leadership was noticing, hey, we're losing all of our young men. So why don't we ordain them to the Aaronic priesthood, the preparatory? And so the priests in the Doctrine and Covenants gave them a job to do, which was to bless the sacrament. So we let the 16 to 8-year-olds bless the sacrament. Now teachers, it says in the Doctrine and Covenants they're supposed to teach, expound, exhort. I just had Pastor Brittany from the Community of Christ.
Fascinating.
And she was talking about how being a teacher is in a way, kind of like home teacher, visiting teacher in the Community of Christ, but they're adults. Our teachers don't teach. We when they turn 14, we can take them ministering or whatever.
Right.
But we don't really follow the Doctrine and Covenants very well. And they were like, well, let's give them something to do. Apparently, I didn't realize this, but it used to be the women that would bring and prepare the sacrament table. And they were like, we're going to give that to the 14-year-old teachers. And and Greg Prince, I even think he says it about this crassly, we needed to give the deacons something to do, so let's let them pass the sacrament. So it's not a priesthood function to pass the sacrament. Or even to prepare the sacrament. It used to be done by women. Why don't we allow women prepare and bless the sacrament?
Such these softballs, Rick. Come on, I was expecting more. All right, so just to clarify, you're asking this question from a standpoint of, would you agree that
you're an official spokesman for the Church?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. But you're asking us from a perspective of a
former bishop, former member of the state presidency.
No. But what I'm saying is that from an argument of equality, things should be more equal.
Yeah,
and because they're not equal,
because clearly preparing and passing the sacrament
Right.
are not priesthood functions.
So
we've given them to our teachers and deacons because we had to give them something to do. Why can't we do that with girls?
we could, right? But I guess I'm taking this to a place of like, if this is an argument of equality, I don't feel like, and so I'm going to go in a direction here, Rick, that I think you'll appreciate, because these are probably opinions not too many people have shared or articulated this way. So I hope you enjoy it, even though I'm probably up in the night and crazy. But I think there is this feeling of we're trying to reach for equality, right? And in 2024, there's much more of a, I don't know if this is the best way to frame it, but a feminist movement of equality on all levels, equal pay, in the secular world and all these things that we just need equality. And that is actually where we'll reach this level of nirvana that it'll be of strengthening community, and more people will be happy, and it'll function better, and church will be better because we'll have female bishops and all this, right? Okay, like that's...
And Community of Christ has a female prophet coming up here in a
That's right.
So they're the good example, right?
They are an example. I would not frame them as a strong example that they're... Okay, so
shots fired.
I love my Community of Christ peeps, but anyways, I won't go there. But so this is another area I'm passionate about as far as men's work.
Okay.
I'll start here. I recently read a book called Why Men Hate Going to Church. I think his last name is Murrow. It was written by 10, 15 years ago. And he looks at the data and makes the argument that if you look at the broader Christian world in modern times, last few decades, there's been a shift towards feminizing the church experience, right? That we go to a church and there's a lot more discussion of love, and I would say people could easily make the argument that general Christianity has gone more feminine. The
I've
data
nuanced that a little bit, but
okay,
go ahead.
all right. I would absolutely, as far as you think, just going back to our faith tradition of the church
Our
experience.
faith tradition used to allow women to prepare the sacrament.
Okay, but what I'm talking more broadly. But if we can engage men on a higher level, the research shows that men, a household with an active, faithful, religious father, that has better consequences for the children ending up religious and with higher morals than if the mother is the religious figure in the home. Okay, so my argument would be we should not reach for this level of equality for the sake of equality, but we should reach for a level of faith development and whatever stimulates faith. So and these efforts in our faith tradition to sort of reach for equality of like, yeah, women aren't ordained to the priesthood, but they have the priesthood, and it's sort of, it's working behind the scenes, and the present quote of what power is it throughout, like those types of quotes where we're sort of reaching for no, like we all have the priesthood, right? We're all good, right? I think that sort of emphasis is not from a place of strength, as is that, yeah, we do have a male priesthood. How do you frame it?
Patriarchy.
Okay, and some may frame that, but in my opinion, in the long run, that's actually a benefit and a strength to our overall community because it gives more opportunity to engage men into church. Now, I get it, and my heart goes out to those. I've had my 11-year-old has turned to me during the sacrament and said, "Hey, Dad, when do I get to pass the sacrament?" Right?
And you're like, "Here's the tray.
Yeah, pass it along.
Pass it to your brother."
That's right. And so obviously there's these tough conversations of like, yeah, this isn't equal. Let's talk about that. Why do you think that is, right? But I think our model is a better long-term model because it gives more opportunity for men to engage in a faith tradition in a more masculine way, right? And I got all sorts of people frustrated that I would ever say such a thing, and I get it, and my heart goes out to...
You're ticking off all my Community of Christ.
That's right. And but I would say this is a male priesthood plan, as far as the longevity and strength of a church, is a better plan than just reaching for equality's sake.
Okay.
So why can't women prepare the sacrament? If they change that tomorrow, just like when they, earlier this week, I watched my 11-year-old daughter in the Saratoga Springs Temple, walk up and be a witness, and it was totally cool. Like, look at that. Her and my wife are up there being witnesses for the baptism. Like, great. If they change it tomorrow, will that spiral me? Oh no, we're becoming more feminine, and no, that's great. If they want to make that change, that's fine. However, I think there is a strength, even with those young men as they're developing, to give them a role in the church that leads into a more masculine tradition, because masculinity is a crucial part of of religion, right? Now, what about the young women? Yeah, we do need to work, and I think there's a lot we can do to create a space and help them feel welcome, but just equalizing everything, I don't think is the best plan to do that.
Okay, I'm going to pull out my church
Let's
history. Restoration. We're a church of the Restoration,
That's right.
Why? I mean, I know you're open to it, but the question is, from my understanding, it was up until probably the early 1900s. I might be off on that a little bit, but the women did prepare the sacrament table. Like, that was their job.
Yeah. Or the blessings they gave back in the day.
Yeah. And Jonathan Stapley and Christine Wright have written a wonderful book on a podcast from years ago that talked about women that laid hands on the sick and blessed. Now, the question was always, is it by the priesthood or not? And it was about 1935. I think it was pretty late and I think it was Heber J. Grant, pretty sure that's right, that finally said, you know what? I know we've been doing this, but to avoid confusion, just call the elders. So would you support this restoration of allowing women to lay hands on the sick, whether or not they have the priesthood? They used to do it. They used to anoint with oil. They used to have a calling in the temple where you could have a baptism of health, which I thought was very interesting. And, as a church of the Restoration, why, and I hate to say this because it's going to make me sound like a fundamentalist, but has the church apostatized by having this male only? Which, of course, the fundamentalists are going to say. And I think a lot of the fundamentalists, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of them have gone back to those early church days. They do allow women to bless by the laying out of hands. It's debatable about whether they hold priesthood, and maybe I'll have to get a fundamentalist. We'll hammer that out. But where's your position on that? Would you support a restoration of women doing these things?
Yeah, I would have no problem with it. I guess my concern would be if we're doing it just for the sake of equality, that would be, obviously, if it's revealed through our prophets, seers, and revelators, and that's the direction they feel when they go, great, I'm in support of it. But if we're doing it just for a sense of equality for equality's sake, that's not a position of strength, in my opinion. And I know many will disagree with me. I think it's a position of strength is recognizing the differences and having different roles, and together creating a church experience that's going to, in the long run, stimulate the most faith and turn more people to Jesus Christ. Now, if it went that way, I wouldn't be like, oh well, now I'm questioning everything, right? Yeah, I'd have no problem with that. But again, I think it's where the mistake, I would argue, is that if we're trying for equality.
So you're saying if we frame it as a restoration, as I just did, you'd be fine with that. But if we frame it as an equality, you're against equality.
And let's move the corner you backed me into. This is great. I'm not against equality, of course. Obviously, in the greater scheme of things, God loves his children equally. Equality does have a dynamic that it plays in the eternal scheme of things. But as far as creating a structure that's going to serve the children best, I can clearly do the math in my head of why God would have a male priesthood in his restored church. Now, if he changes that, I'd be like, great, I'm going to have more questions, but that's great. I've got questions about a lot of things. But just this pressure from the secular world of equality, if we're being nudged because of that I believe is a mistake. If it goes that way, if God reveals it, if his prophets say that's the way it is, great, let's do it.
Okay.
Is that fair?
So you're not going to apostatize if women hold the priesthood tomorrow?
No.
President Nelson, Wow.
I mean,
guess this will be after
I would-
conference, even though we're talking before conference.
I am willing to bet, if I was a betting man, that will not happen in mortality. And I
Immortality.
get that, well, in eternity, I don't know. And again, I don't know how the mechanics of all things God works behind the scenes, but for people who are holding out hope that that's going to happen, like, I think that's something they need to take to God and reconcile. Like, well, what if it doesn't? Like, can you still maintain faith? And I think a lot of people do. But if that's a tough issue for you to reconcile, and you just cannot exist in a faith community where men have the priesthood and women don't, then my heart goes out to you, and I hope you still come to the chili cook-off, and I hope you still feel like you're loved here, but I get that some people struggle with that. I don't struggle with it as much, but maybe I'm just a patriarchal man that just doesn't get it. And okay, maybe I am.
You're fine with that. All right. Okay, last question. This one, we don't usually delve into politics, but I'm going to go political here a little bit.
Okay.
Christian nationalism is becoming a bigger and bigger issue.
You're the first person to ask me about Christian nationalism. Okay, I'll see if I got anything here, Rick, but go ahead.
So a lot of people would see that as problematic in our church, especially from our polygamous background. We believe in a separation of church and state. A lot of other people are going to be like, no, God founded this country. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, and and he should be the head of our government. Where do you fall?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, being raised in Utah, my politics align very much with being a conservative Utahn. I don't think anybody would be shocked by my perspectives and things. However, I do read, experiences from Ezra Taft Benson and some of his political perspectives or how he did things, and I still scratch my head. I'm like, wow, like, you are something else, man. Like, and bless your heart. And I can point to several conference talks that I love from President Benson and so forth. When
he wasn't talking about John Birch Society.
Yeah. And I love his Constitutional Conference talks as well. But so the question is, like, is it a problem?
Is it a problem in the church? Yeah.
In our church?
Yeah.
Like, as a problem isn't like, is it?
I mean, Kurt, the last time I interviewed you, you lived in South Salt Lake, I remember, and then you've moved to Tooele, and now you're in Utah County. So you've moved a lot.
Yeah,
you've had a lot of different wards here.
Yeah.
More than me. I changed wards and don't move for 10 years.
Yeah. So I would say to that, in our church, I don't think it's as big as a problem as in, if I was at a interfaith event a few weeks ago. This evangelical person was talking, and he made comments that I thought that were super conservative, very politically.
More conservative than you.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, and some of the comments I agreed with, but I thought, man, in this context, I would never hear that in church. And if I did, even though I agree with you, I would say you can't be doing that. And I don't feel like in our church experience, and of course I've been to, Central Utah in a Sunday school class and heard someone blast President Obama, and I'm like, wow, we're not in Salt Lake anymore. So I know that it happens. Generally speaking,
in Salt Lake, Obama was spoken of in loving terms. Is that what you're saying?
Well, or it just wasn't mentioned. But I would say in church, in a faith context, I don't see it as a problem, but I'm maybe sheltered just in my Utah bubble here. And maybe if I went to church in DC, it'd be more of a thing. I don't know. But I don't see it as a big of a problem as maybe in other faiths. Is that fair?
Okay. So not a problem.
I don't think so.
And
I do wish, I'll say this, which I think is appropriate for your podcast. I really, I talk about President Benson and reading stories between him and Hugh B. Brown.
Oh, yeah.
They were much more forward with where they stood politically. And I appreciated that more, because at least I knew where President Benson stood or Hugh B. Brown stood, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe I disagreed with some things Hugh B. Brown said, but at least I know where he stood, or same with President Benson, right? These concepts of politics, where now the church has sort of gone to this place of, they're very buttoned down with PR and their messaging and all that, where we don't really know where they stand. Now, some people say like, oh, Kurt, believe me, I know there's not a single person in the Quorum of the 12 who's voting for Donald Trump this election. And then you talk to somebody else like, oh, Kurt, let me assure you, every single member of the Quorum of the 12 is voting for Donald Trump, or vice versa, President Biden, or not voting for President Biden, right? So I appreciate the open dialogue more of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where at least I knew where they stood and I could hear the argument and come to myself. Where now the message is kind of just so buttoned down that we then fill in the gaps, right? And I've heard people look at something the church does, and that's because they're a more progressive political church, and then the other side is like, no, that's why they did this, because they're super conservative and they love all things, Constitution, whatever. And I'm just like, I don't think anybody knows what anybody's voting for, and maybe we should pump the brakes before we assume that we know who they're voting for or why or where they stand. All we can do is look at the church newsroom and public statements they put out, and it says, looks like they just want us to go vote, or looks like they recognize that party line voting is something you should reconsider, right? And maybe be more intentional about who you vote for. And anyways, that dichotomy of I wish the message was a little more messy, even though people are uncomfortable with messy. Like people, I'm uncomfortable with it. Elder Benson saying that, or President Hugh B. Brown saying that. When in reality, I think I like that sort of messiness, and now we got to figure it out, and because we know where they stood.
Well, was the church growing when they were messy? And now we're not messy, right? And not growing?
Yeah, maybe there's something to that. I don't know, but.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to share?
Man, well, I didn't know we were going to go with Christian nationalism.
Yeah, I hit you. That one blind.
That was good. No, I mean, I just hope people support Gospel Tangents. I just love listening to them. And there's many times you have people on here that I think this guy's crazy. And like many people are listening now, this guy's crazy. But I can't help but just listen, and I appreciate unique perspectives. And, you talk to the Mesoamerica people, the Heartlanders, and all sides of people in the church, out of the church. And I just appreciate hearing different perspectives, and in a roundabout way, they build my faith and help me be more orthodox.
Well, and I'll just put a plug in for Leading Saints. I love it because clearly, are you the most Orthodox guest I have? I would say probably.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know. The BYU guys.
The rest are not crazy enough to talk to you.
But you still tackle tough subjects: drug abuse, suicide, pornography. So it's not just, hey, let's talk about ministering. And so I love that about you.
Yeah.
You do tackle some tough topics too.
I hope so.
And not in the. It's not unorthodox, but it's not something you talk about at church usually.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully we can talk more about it at church once we get comfortable talking about it. So that's my goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, Kurt Francom, Executive Director of Leading Saints, thank you so much for being here on Gospel Tangents.
I hope it happens again. I don't know if it will, though.
All right. You going to write another book?
Maybe. You've given me a few suggestions. So that's
all right. Well, thanks again, Kurt. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rick.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Kurt Francom. He's the host of the Leading Saints podcast and the brand new author of Is God Disappointed in Me? So you would definitely, hopefully, will win one of these if you signed up to our contest at gospeltangents.com/contest. In our next conversation, we're going to talk to another author, Joseph Spencer. A Word in Season is his book, and he's going to talk about Isaiah in the Book of Mormon. I have to tell you, I know that Nephi says that we need to study the words of Isaiah, but I hate to study the words of Isaiah.
Yeah, you're not alone. There are a lot of people that feel this way.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.